Lakshmi's hands trembled as she clutched the last handful of grain left in her small hut. Her son, Arjun, lay asleep on a thin mat, his tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Hunger had taken its toll on him, and Lakshmi knew she couldn't let him suffer any longer. The fields outside, once full of promise, now lay ruined after the recent storm. The crops she had nurtured with her own hands were gone, leaving nothing but barren land and shattered hopes. She stepped outside, the dry wind whipping against her weary face. The landlord's men stood at the edge of her property, their cruel eyes watching. Debts weighed on her like an iron chain. The landlord had given her one last warning: either pay what she owed or lose everything. But how could she pay when she had nothing left? Summoning her courage, she approached the landlord's mansion, a towering structure that stood in stark contrast to the poverty surrounding it. The guard sneered as she pleaded for more time. The landlord, a man with cold, calculating eyes, barely spared her a glance. "Time," he scoffed. "Time doesn't fill stomachs. You have until tomorrow. After that, your land is mine." She walked back home, each step heavier than the last. She glanced at Arjun, his frail body curled up in sleep, unaware of the storm raging in her heart. She couldn't let him grow up in a world that only crushed the weak. There had to be another way. That night, she packed what little they had: a few clothes, a tattered blanket, and a handful of rice wrapped in cloth. She gently shook Arjun awake. "We're leaving," she whispered. He rubbed his sleepy eyes. "Where are we going, Ma?" "Somewhere better." With Arjun's small hand in hers, she stepped onto the dirt path leading away from the only home she had ever known. The village, once filled with laughter and life, now seemed like a prison she was finally escaping. But the road ahead was uncertain. The journey to the city was long and unforgiving. They walked for hours under the scorching sun, stopping only when Arjun's tired legs refused to move. At night, they slept under the open sky, Lakshmi holding her son close to keep him warm. By the time they reached the city, exhaustion clung to them like a second skin. Towering buildings loomed overhead, their cold structures a stark contrast to the simplicity of their village. People rushed past them, lost in their own worlds, unaware of the mother and son standing at the edge of a new beginning. Lakshmi tightened her grip on Arjun's hand. The city was vast, unknown, and merciless. But she had made her choice. She had burned the bridge to her past. Now there was only one path forward: survival. The city was nothing like the village. Noise, dust, and an endless sea of people surrounded Lakshmi as she clutched Arjun's hand. Hunger gnawed at their insides, but there was no time to rest. She approached shop after shop, her voice barely above a whisper as she asked for work. Each rejection chipped away at her resolve. "We don't hire beggars," one man sneered. "We need someone younger," another dismissed her without a glance. She didn't argue. She couldn't afford to. Every moment spent pleading was another moment Arjun went without food. By nightfall, they found themselves on a footpath near a market, surrounded by others who had nowhere else to go. Arjun curled up beside her, his head resting against her lap. His stomach rumbled, but he didn't complain. He never did. Lakshmi fought back tears. She had promised him a better life, yet here they were, sleeping on cold concrete under the indifferent gaze of a city that didn't care whether they lived or died. The next morning, she woke to the smell of fried snacks. A small food cart stood nearby, manned by a middle-aged vendor. The scent made Arjun stir, his eyes lighting up with longing. Lakshmi hesitated before stepping forward. "Do you need help?" she asked. The vendor, Ravi, studied her for a moment before nodding. "You can wash dishes." "I can't pay much." She didn't ask how much. Any amount was better than nothing. She scrubbed metal plates, her fingers raw from the soap, while Arjun sat nearby, watching. Ravi noticed the boy's hollow cheeks and silently handed him a small piece of roti. Lakshmi wanted to refuse, but Arjun devoured it before she could. Days passed in a blur of exhaustion and hunger. Lakshmi worked from dawn till night, earning just enough for a single meal. She tried to save a little, but survival was a cruel thief. It took everything and still asked for more. Then, Arjun fell sick. His small body burned with fever, his breath shallow and labored. Panic seized Lakshmi as she carried him to a clinic, her heart pounding. But the nurse barely looked at her before shaking her head. No money, no treatment. She pleaded, begged, but the door shut in her face. Arjun whimpered in her arms, his skin clammy. She had nothing left to sell, nothing left to give. The city had swallowed every ounce of hope she had clung to. Desperation drove her back to Ravi. He saw the terror in her eyes and pulled her aside. There's work at a factory. It's dangerous, but they pay daily. She didn't hesitate. Nothing mattered except saving Arjun. If the factory meant money, she would do it, whatever the cost. The factory loomed like a beast, its walls stained with soot, its air thick with the stench of metal and sweat. Lakshmi stood in line with other desperate souls, her fingers tightening around the few rupees Ravi had given her for Arjun's medicine. She couldn't afford to lose this chance. A man with cold eyes looked her over. You work hard, you stay. You slow down, you leave. She nodded. Questions didn't matter. Only survival did. Inside, machines roared, their deafening hum filling every space. The heat was suffocating, the work relentless. She lifted heavy sacks, her muscles screaming in protest. Sweat dripped from her brow, but she pushed through. Every second here meant Arjun had a chance. Hours bled into each other. Breaks were rare, and exhaustion settled deep into her bones. The workers around her were just as worn, their eyes hollow, their hands scarred. No one spoke. There was nothing to say. By nightfall, she stumbled out, her hands shaking as she clutched her first pay. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She rushed to buy medicine, her feet aching, her body screaming for rest. Arjun was barely conscious when she returned. She pressed the pills to his lips, whispering reassurances even as fear clawed at her heart. Days passed in a blur of work and worry. Arjun's fever broke, but he remained weak. She hid her exhaustion, her aching limbs, the growing pain in her back. He couldn't know how much she was breaking. Then the accident happened. A scream cut through the factory. A worker had slipped, his hand crushed beneath the machine. Chaos erupted, but the supervisors barely spared him a glance. Get back to work, they barked. Lakshmi swallowed hard. The air felt heavier now, danger lurking in every motion. She kept her head down, pushing through the pain, the fatigue. She couldn't stop. But fate had other plans. A sudden snap, a loose cable, a metal beam swinging wildly. She saw it too late. Pain exploded through her side as she was thrown to the ground. The world blurred, sounds fading. She wasn't sure how long she lay there. When she opened her eyes, she was outside the factory, her wages thrown beside her. They had dragged her out like discarded waste. Her body wouldn't move. Every breath was agony. She had nothing left. No strength. No fight. But then she thought of Arjun. Alone. Waiting. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself up. Each step a battle. The city spun around her, but she pressed on. By the time she reached Arjun, she collapsed beside him, her breath ragged. He touched her face, his small fingers trembling. Ma? She smiled through the pain. I'm here. Then, darkness took her. Light flickered in and out of her vision, distant voices blending into the hum of the city. When Lakshmi finally woke, she was in Ravi's small home, a thin blanket covering her broken body. Arjun sat beside her, his eyes swollen from crying. You scared me, Ma, he whispered, gripping her hand. Pain throbbed through every inch of her, but she forced a weak smile. I'm still here. Ravi appeared, relief softening his usually tough face. You're lucky to be alive. The factory would have let you die on the street. She tried to sit up, but her body refused. I need to work. I can't. You can't go back, Ravi interrupted. They won't take you now. You need rest. Rest. The word felt foreign, almost impossible. But as she looked at Arjun's worried face, she knew she had no choice. Her body had given everything. There was nothing left to give. Days passed, each one a battle against pain and helplessness. She hated being idle, relying on Ravi's kindness. But he never complained. He brought food, helped Arjun, and kept her spirits from sinking too deep. One evening, as she watched Ravi prepare food for his stall, an idea formed. "I can cook," she murmured. He raised a brow. "You can barely stand." "Then I'll sit," she countered. "I won't be useless." She started small, rolling dough, chopping vegetables, teaching Arjun what she knew. The first time she made chapatis, her hands shook, but Ravi didn't say a word. He simply tasted one and nodded. Not bad. Hope flickered. Ravi cleared a space at his stall, letting her cook a few simple meals. Customers noticed. Her food was different, reminding them of home. Word spread. Coins trickled in. Arjun's laughter returned, his cheeks filling out.